The heavy clouds hung low over Philadelphia on that Tuesday afternoon, casting the city in shades of gray. The clock on the dashboard of Staff Sergeant James Cooper's black Ford F-150 showed 2:15 p.m. as he pulled into the parking lot of the Philadelphia Police Department's Central Division. The rain drummed steadily against his truck's roof, creating a rhythm that matched his tired heartbeat. Cooper was not in a good mood. 3 days ago, someone had stolen his prized possession, a midnight blue Harley-Davidson Street Glide that he had bought with his combat pay from his second deployment. The bike meant everything to him, a symbol of freedom after 15 months in the dusty mountains of Afghanistan. Now, after spending days searching the streets and checking local shops, he had finally accepted that he needed to file an official police report. At 32 years old, Cooper cut an impressive figure even in civilian clothes. His military bearing showed in his straight posture and alert eyes, habits that 3 tours of duty had permanently etched into his personality. He wore dark jeans, a gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders, and a black leather jacket that kept the autumn chill at bay. The rain had started to soak through his short brown hair as he gathered his bike's paperwork from the passenger seat. As Cooper stepped out of his truck, his combat boots splashing in a shallow puddle, he immediately noticed something was off. His training had taught him to always scan his surroundings, and right now, his instincts were picking up potential trouble. Near the station's main entrance, 3 large men in leather vests were hanging around, despite the uncomfortable weather. Their vests displayed patches of the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club, a group Cooper had heard about from his friends in law enforcement, and nothing he'd heard was good. The largest of the 3, a bear of a man with a wild gray-streaked beard, kept checking his phone and muttering to his companions. The shortest one, wearing a bandana covered in skull patterns, paced back and forth like a caged animal. The third biker, sporting a shaved head and full-sleeve tattoos, leaned against the wall, smoking a cigarette and glaring at anyone who walked past. Cooper took his time walking toward the entrance, studying the trio without making it obvious. He noticed small details that others might miss, the bulge of what might be a knife in the tall one's boot, the brass knuckles partially visible in the bandana-wearing biker's back pocket, and the way they positioned themselves to control the space around the entrance. Their body language screamed trouble, yet here they were, right in front of a police station. The rain continued to fall, creating small rivers that ran down the steps leading to the station's entrance. A few police officers came and went, giving the bikers warning looks, but not directly confronting them. Cooper guessed the bikers were probably careful to stay just within the bounds of legal behavior, at least for now. As a staff sergeant responsible for the lives of other soldiers, Cooper had learned to read situations like this. Something was building up, like the pressure before a storm. He could have used the side entrance. It would have been easier, safer even. But that wasn't who James Cooper was. During his last tour, he had received a Silver Star for leading his squad through heavy fire to rescue trapped civilians. He hadn't taken the easy way out then, and he wouldn't start now. Still, he hoped the situation wouldn't escalate. He had come here to file a report about his stolen motorcycle, not to get into a confrontation. As Cooper approached the steps, he noticed the bikers tense up slightly. The one with the bandana stopped pacing, and the tall one slipped his phone into his pocket. The bald biker flicked his cigarette away, the ember hissing as it hit a puddle. Their attention wasn't focused on him, though, at least not yet. Instead, they were watching something behind him with predatory interest. Cooper glanced back, using the reflection in his truck's window to see what had caught their attention. His jaw tightened as he spotted a young woman in a business suit walking toward the station, clutching a briefcase and trying to stay dry under a small umbrella. The look in the biker's eyes told him everything he needed to know. His day was about to become much more complicated than just filing a stolen motorcycle report. The young woman was about halfway up the police station's walkway when Tank, the tall biker with the gray-streaked beard, stepped directly into her path. She stopped abruptly, her black heels clicking on the wet concrete. Her umbrella tilted slightly as she took an instinctive step backward, revealing her face, professional, determined, but now showing the first signs of concern. Well, what do we have here?" Tank's voice was rough, like gravel being crushed. "Looks like our favorite lawyer decided to show up after all." He turned to his companions, spreading his arms wide in mock celebration. "Boys, Ms. Sarah Mitchell has finally blessed us with her presence." Cooper watched as the other 2 bikers, Razor with his skull bandana and Chains with his shaved head, moved to form a loose triangle around the woman. The positioning wasn't random. They were using classic intimidation tactics, cutting off her escape routes while staying just far enough apart to claim they weren't actually threatening her. Sarah Mitchell gripped her briefcase tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Mr. Davidson," she addressed Tank by what Cooper assumed was his real name. "Any attempt to intimidate a state prosecutor is a felony offense. You're already facing serious charges. Don't make this worse for yourself." Her voice was steady, but Cooper could hear the slight tremor beneath her professional tone. As a soldier, he had learned to recognize the sound of someone fighting to maintain their composure. He began moving closer, his footsteps masked by the continuing rainfall. Chains let out a harsh laugh. "Listen to her, Tank. Still talking about charges when she should be worried about getting home safe tonight." He pulled out his phone, making a show of taking pictures of her. The implied threat was clear. They knew what she looked like and could find her later. "We just want to have a friendly conversation," Razor added, adjusting his bandana with hands covered in faded spiderweb tattoos. "About how memory can be a funny thing. Sometimes people forget what they saw. Sometimes they decide not to show up to court at all." Sarah's umbrella shook slightly, but she stood her ground. "I have copies of all the evidence against your club safely stored in multiple locations. Even if something were to happen to me, the case would continue." She took a deep breath. "Now, please step aside and let me do my job." Tank's face darkened. He moved closer, using his height to loom over her. "That sounds an awful lot like you're accusing us of planning something, Counselor. We don't take kindly to false accusations." He reached out as if to touch her face. "Maybe we should discuss this somewhere more private." Cooper had seen enough. 3 combat tours had taught him the difference between posturing and real intent, and these men were moving past simple intimidation. Their body language was shifting from threatening to predatory. If he didn't intervene now, things would escalate quickly. He closed the remaining distance in 4 long strides, his voice cutting through the rain with parade ground authority. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" All 3 bikers turned to face him, momentarily surprised by his sudden appearance. Cooper positioned himself slightly to Sarah's left, giving her a clear path to the station's entrance while keeping all 3 men in his field of vision. Tank recovered first, his surprise turning to amusement. "Mind your own business, Boy Scout. This is a private conversation." When you're blocking the entrance to a police station to threaten a state prosecutor, you make it everyone's business, Cooper replied calmly. His eyes never stopped moving, tracking the small shifts in the bikers' positions, the way Razor's hand drifted toward his back pocket, the tension building in Chain's shoulders. Sarah Mitchell seized the moment of distraction to take a step toward the entrance, but Tank quickly moved to block her again. "We're not done talking, Counselor." "Yes, you are," Cooper stated firmly. He didn't raise his voice or make any aggressive moves. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone came from years of commanding troops in life-or-death situations. "The lady has asked you to move. I'm asking you to move. The smart play here is to walk away." Tank turned his full attention to Cooper, sizing him up. The biker was taller by a few inches and probably had 50 pounds on him, most of it muscle gone slightly soft. Behind his scraggly beard, a cruel smile began to form. "Well, boys," he said to his companions, "looks like we got ourselves a hero." The rain continued to fall steadily around them as Cooper maintained his position between Sarah Mitchell and the 3 bikers. His military training had taught him that the moments before a fight were often more important than the fight itself. Right now, he was calculating angles, distances, and potential threats, just as he had done countless times in Afghanistan. "Ma'am," Cooper said quietly to Sarah, keeping his eyes on the bikers, "I suggest you head inside now." You could sense her hesitation, probably worried about leaving him alone with these 3 men. "It's okay. This is what I do." The confidence in his voice seemed to reassure her, and she began slowly moving toward the station entrance. Tank took a step forward, but Cooper smoothly shifted his position, staying between the biker and Sarah. "You're making a big mistake, soldier boy," Tank growled, his earlier amusement turning to anger. "This ain't your fight." Cooper heard the police station door open and close behind him, knowing Sarah had made it inside. Now he could focus entirely on the 3 men in front of him. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "I am a soldier. Staff Sergeant James Cooper, U.S. Army, 3rd Infantry Division. And you're right that this isn't my fight, because there doesn't need to be a fight at all. Razor and Chains had spread out slightly, trying to flank him. Cooper adjusted his stance subtly, keeping all three men in his peripheral vision. His boots were planted firmly on the wet concrete, knees slightly bent, ready to move in any direction, but his hands remained relaxed at his sides, non-threatening, yet prepared. 3 tours in Afghanistan taught me a lot about choices, Cooper continued, his voice steady and clear despite the rain. Right now, you gentlemen have a choice. You can walk away, maybe go grab a coffee. Think about whether threatening a prosecutor is really worth adding federal charges to your problems. Chain spat on the ground. You think you can take all 3 of us, tough guy? This ain't the sandbox anymore. His tattooed hands were clenched into fists, knuckles white with tension. Cooper noticed a police officer watching through the station window, probably calling for backup. He just needed to keep things contained for a few more minutes. I think, he replied carefully, that you're smarter than this. You've got enough legal troubles without assaulting a decorated combat veteran on camera, right in front of a police station. He gestured slightly with his chin toward the security cameras mounted above the entrance. Tank's eyes flickered upward, and Cooper saw a flash of uncertainty cross the big man's face. But Razor was already reaching for something in his back pocket, his movements jerky with adrenaline. Last chance, Cooper warned, his voice dropping lower. Walk away now, and we all go home dry. Keep pushing, and this gets complicated. Years of combat experience had taught him to recognize the signs. Razor was the wild card, the one most likely to do something stupid. Tank might be the leader, but Razor's twitchy movements and aggressive stance showed he was running on emotion rather than thought. Tank stepped closer, using his height to try to intimidate Cooper. You think you're some kind of hero? Let me tell you something about heroes in the real world. 3 purple hearts, Cooper interrupted quietly. 2 bronze stars, 1 silver star. I got nothing to prove to you or anyone else. But I've spent too many years protecting people to walk away now. His eyes met Tank's directly. So what's it going to be? The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Razor's hand was still hovering near his back pocket. Chains had shifted his weight onto his back foot, ready to launch forward. Tank's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, pride, and growing uncertainty. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the rainfall, distant but getting closer. Cooper didn't smile, didn't move, didn't give any indication that he'd heard them. He simply stood there, rain dripping from his hair, watching Tank with the steady gaze of a man who had faced far worse odds and survived. The distant sirens seemed to make Tank even more agitated. His face reddened beneath his gray-streaked beard, and his massive hands clenched into fists the size of small hams. The rain had soaked through his leather vest, making the devil's hand patch look like a dark stain against the wet leather. You think those sirens scare us? Tank growled, taking another step toward Cooper. By the time they get here, this'll all be over. He glanced at his companions, giving them a subtle nod that Cooper immediately recognized as a signal. Cooper had seen this move before, not from bikers, but from insurgents in Kandahar. The leader makes a show of aggression up front while his partners move to attack from the sides. His boots shifted slightly on the wet concrete, adjusting his balance without making any obvious movements. Last warning, Cooper said quietly, his voice almost lost in the sound of rain and approaching sirens. Don't do something you can't undo. Tank's response was a sudden shove to Cooper's chest, powerful enough to push back an ordinary man, but Cooper wasn't ordinary. His time in the army had taught him to root himself like a tree when needed. He absorbed the push with his upper body while keeping his feet planted, barely moving an inch. The look of surprise on Tank's face would have been comical in other circumstances. He clearly wasn't used to people standing their ground against him, let alone barely moving when he used his full strength. Inside the station, Cooper said calmly, nodding toward the entrance, "There's a young Marine working the front desk. Lost his leg in Fallujah. Behind him is a retired SWAT officer who teaches hand-to-hand combat to new recruits. Through those doors, you'll find at least 20 cops, 4 of them combat veterans." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Or you can deal with just me, your choice." Razor wasn't interested in choices. His hand finally came out of his back pocket, brass knuckles glinting dully in the rain. "Enough talking," he snarled, moving forward with the confidence of someone used to quick, brutal fights. Cooper noticed Sarah Mitchell had returned to the station window, phone in hand, probably recording everything. Good. Witnesses and evidence would make the legal aftermath cleaner. He kept his hands open, his stance relaxed but ready. "You really going to let him disrespect us like this, Tank?" Chains asked, his shaved head gleaming with rainwater. "We got a reputation to maintain." Tank's face showed the battle between his anger and his common sense. Cooper had seen that look before, proud men realizing they might be in over their heads but unable to back down without losing face. It almost always ended the same way. "Nobody disrespects the devil's hand," Tank declared, pulling himself up to his full height, especially not some government-trained Boy Scout. He cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp despite the rainfall. "Boys, let's teach the sergeant here why civilians should mind their own business." Cooper sighed internally. He had really hoped to avoid this. His commanding officer in Afghanistan used to say that the best soldiers were the ones who tried hardest to avoid fighting, because they understood exactly what they were capable of doing when pushed. The three bikers were moving now, coordinating better than Cooper had expected. Tank straight ahead, Razor coming in from the left, Chain circling to the right. Their footsteps splashed in the puddles, creating a strange rhythm with the rain and sirens. "Final chance," Cooper said, loud enough for the station cameras to pick up. "Walk away." He kept his hands raised, palm out, the universal gesture of peace. But his fingers were slightly curled, ready to form fists the instant diplomacy failed. Tank's answer was a meaty fist swinging toward Cooper's face. Time seemed to slow down, just like it always did in combat. Cooper could see everything clearly. Tank's weight shifted too far forward, Razor's brass knuckles telegraphing a wild swing from the left, Chain still slightly out of position on the right. The first punch hadn't even completed its arc when Cooper knew exactly how this would end. His muscles tensed, combat instincts taking over, years of training ready to be unleashed. These three men were about to learn a harsh lesson about judging a book by its cover, or in this case, judging a soldier by his civilian clothes. Tank's punch cut through the rain like a freight train, but it might as well have been moving in slow motion to Cooper's trained eyes. 3 tours in combat zones had taught him to read body language like a book, and Tanks telegraphed his intentions clear as day. Cooper shifted his weight slightly to his right, letting Tank's massive fist brush past his left ear. The big biker's momentum carried him forward, his wet boots sliding slightly on the concrete. In that split second of imbalance, Cooper struck, not with power, but with precision. His open palm hit Tank's extended elbow, redirecting the big man's momentum. Tank stumbled forward, nearly falling face first into the police station's wall. Razor came in next, brass knuckles glinting in the rain. His attack was wild, fueled by anger rather than technique. Cooper stepped inside the swing, his left forearm deflecting Razor's strike upward while his right hand grabbed the biker's vest. Using Razor's own forward motion, Cooper pivoted and sent him sprawling into a puddle with a simple hip throw, a move he practiced thousands of times in army combat training. "Stay down," Cooper warned, but Chains was already moving in from behind, thinking he had the element of surprise. Cooper didn't need to see him. The splash of his boots and his ragged breathing gave away his position perfectly. Cooper dropped into a crouch, letting Chain's wild haymaker pass overhead. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the biker's passing arm and stood up, using Chain's momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The tattooed biker landed hard on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh. Tank had recovered by now, roaring with rage as he charged like a bull. Cooper sidestepped smoothly, years of hand-to-hand combat training taking over. His boot caught Tank's ankle while his hands guided the big man's shoulder, turning the charge into an awkward tumble. Tank crashed into a row of parked motorcycles, sending them dominoing into each other with a series of metallic crashes. "That's enough." Cooper's voice cracked like a whip through the rain. "Stay down, all of you. It's over." But Razor wasn't finished. He scrambled up from the puddle, water streaming from his bandana, brass knuckles still clutched in his fist. His eyes were wild now, all reason replaced by pure rage. He rushed at Cooper, swinging wildly. Cooper's response was textbook military precision. He trapped Razor's armed hand with his left, stepped past the punch, and delivered a short, sharp strike to the biker's solar plexus with his right. As Razor doubled over, Cooper smoothly disarmed him, removing the brass knuckles with a simple wrist lock that made the biker yelp in pain. Chains tried to get up, but Cooper's stern glance and the sound of rapidly approaching sirens made him reconsider. He stayed on the wet ground, raising his hands in surrender. Tank was the last to accept defeat. He pushed himself up from the fallen motorcycles, his vest torn, his beard dripping with rain. For a moment, he looked like he might try one last attack. Then he saw Cooper's stance, calm, centered, ready for anything, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "What? What the hell are you?" Tank panted, leaning against a lamppost for support. "Just a soldier," Cooper replied simply. "One who gave you every chance to walk away." He kept his guard up, knowing that wounded pride could be more dangerous than any weapon. The first police car skidded into the parking lot, lights flashing, followed quickly by two more. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, taking in the scene. 3 battered bikers, 1 calm soldier, and several knocked-over motorcycles. "Everything's under control," Cooper called out to the officers, keeping his hands visible. These gentlemen were just leaving, but they might need some medical attention first. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the station with several officers, her phone still recording. "I got everything on video," she announced, including their initial threats and the fact that Mr. Cooper here acted entirely in self-defense after trying multiple times to de-escalate. Cooper nodded in appreciation but kept his attention on the bikers until they were properly secured. His training had taught him that the aftermath of a fight could be just as dangerous as the fight itself. But as he watched the officers efficiently handcuff Tank and his companions, he allowed himself a small smile. All that combat training had paid off, though probably not in the way his instructors had imagined. The police station's front area buzzed with activity as officers processed the 3 bikers. The rain had finally stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the red and blue lights of the patrol cars. Inside, Cooper sat on a wooden bench, giving his statement to Detective Mike Roberts, a former Army Ranger who had immediately recognized Cooper's military bearing. "So after you deflected the first attack," Detective Roberts said, making notes in his pad, "you used non-lethal control techniques?" His tone carried a hint of professional appreciation. The detective had already watched Sarah Mitchell's video 3 times, studying Cooper's precise movements with obvious respect. "Yes, sir," Cooper replied, holding an ice pack to his knuckles, not from hitting anyone, but from redirecting Tank's massive fist. Standard Army combatives, focusing on control rather than damage. Everything they taught us about minimal necessary force. Through the glass partition, they could see Tank sitting handcuffed to a bench, his once intimidating presence diminished by his wet, bedraggled appearance. A paramedic was checking him for injuries, but other than some bruises and a wounded pride, he seemed mostly intact. Sarah Mitchell entered the room, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She had changed into dry clothes that someone had brought her from her office, and her professional demeanor was fully restored. "Staff Sergeant Cooper," she said, extending her hand, "I can't thank you enough. Those men have been trying to intimidate witnesses in a major case against their club. Now we can add witness tampering and assault charges to their list." Cooper stood and shook her hand, noticing several other officers gathering around. Word had spread quickly about the incident, and the station's veterans especially wanted to hear the full story. "Ma'am, I just did what any soldier would do," Cooper said modestly. "Though I have to admit, this isn't how I planned to spend my afternoon. I only came here to report my stolen motorcycle." Officer Jenny Chen, a rookie who had been manning the front desk, stepped forward with some papers. "About that, Staff Sergeant, while you were giving your statement, we ran the details of your stolen Harley through our system. A bike matching its description was spotted at a chop shop we raided last night. It's impounded at our vehicle lot." Cooper's eyes lit up with hope. "Is it a midnight blue street glide? Custom exhaust, small scratch on the left saddlebag?" "That's the one," Officer Chen smiled. "And here's the interesting part. The shop was connected to the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club. These 3 gentlemen's associates may have been responsible for your theft." Detective Roberts let out a low whistle. Talk about karma coming full circle. Through the glass, they could see Razor and Chains being led to holding cells. Both men winced. 2 hours after the incident, Cooper stood in the police impound lot, staring at his recovered Harley-Davidson Street Glide. The midnight blue paint still gleamed under the lot's fluorescent lights, though he noticed a few new scratches that would need attention. Officer Chen held a clipboard while he inspected the bike, checking off items on the recovery form. They were probably planning to strip it for parts, Officer Chen explained, pointing to some partially removed components. Lucky for you, our raid caught them before they could do any serious damage. The mechanic says it just needs minor repairs. Cooper ran his hand along the bike's leather seat, remembering all the miles they covered together. This wasn't just transportation to him. It was a piece of his journey back to civilian life after each deployment. Every scratch and mark told a story of freedom and healing. Staff Sergeant Cooper. A voice called from behind them. Cooper turned to see Sarah Mitchell walking across the lot, accompanied by District Attorney Thomas Reynolds, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Reynolds wanted to personally thank you, Sarah explained, her professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. Your intervention today did more than just stop those 3 bikers. The district attorney extended his hand to Cooper. Ms. Mitchell showed me the video footage. Those men have been terrorizing witnesses in several ongoing cases against the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club. Their arrest today gives us leverage we didn't have before. Cooper shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip. Just glad I could help, sir. Though I only came here to report my stolen bike. He gestured toward the Harley with a slight smile. About that, Reynolds said, pulling out his phone. We've been building a case against the Devil's Hand for months. Vehicle theft, drug trafficking, witness intimidation. But witnesses keep disappearing or changing their stories. Your incident today changes everything. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out some documents. Tank, or James Deggetson, his real name, is the club's sergeant-at-arms. He's been responsible for most of their intimidation tactics. The video of him assaulting you, combined with his threats against me, gives us probable cause for much broader search warrants. 3 other chapters of The Devil's Hand are being raided as we speak, Reynolds added, checking messages on his phone. Your stolen bike helped us connect several chop shops to their operation. Sometimes the smallest crimes lead to the biggest cases. Officer Chen finished her paperwork and handed Cooper a set of keys. The bike's officially released back to you, Staff Sergeant. Though it'll need to stay here until tomorrow when our mechanic can check it over. Standard procedure for recovered vehicles. Cooper nodded, understanding the process. He'd learned patience in the Army, and one more day wouldn't hurt. Besides, after the afternoon's excitement, he was starting to feel the adrenaline crash. There's something else, Sarah said, pulling out another document. We'd like you to consider being a witness in our case. Your military record, combined with your professional handling of today's incident, makes you an ideal witness. Juries tend to trust decorated veterans who show restraint under pressure. Cooper took the document, scanning its contents. His commanding officer had always said that sometimes the most important battles were fought in courtrooms, not battlefields. I'll help however I can, he agreed. Those men chose to abuse their power and intimidate people. That goes against everything I believe in. Reynolds smiled, clearly pleased. Excellent. My office will be in touch to schedule a formal deposition, and Staff Sergeant, he paused, making sure he had Cooper's full attention. The police mentioned offering you a job. If that doesn't work out, the DA's office could always use someone with your particular set of skills in our witness protection unit. As they walked back toward the station, Cooper could see his reflection in the building's windows, still in his civilian clothes, but standing straight with military bearing. He thought about the day's events, how he'd come to file a simple stolen vehicle report and ended up in the middle of a major criminal investigation. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, he'd get his bike back. Next week, he'd give his deposition. And somewhere down the line, he'd have to make a decision about his future. But for now, he was content knowing he'd made a difference, just like he had overseas. One small stand against those who would use fear and violence to control others. 1 week after the incident at the police station, Cooper sat in his apartment watching the evening news. His story had caught the media's attention, and now the local channel was running a special report about veterans in law enforcement. The security footage from the police station played on his TV screen, showing his encounter with the bikers from multiple angles. And in an update to our top story, the news anchor said, 3 members of the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club have been indicted on multiple charges, including witness tampering and assault. The incident, captured on video outside the Philadelphia Police Department, has led to a broader investigation into organized crime activities. Cooper's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Mitchell. The DA's office had been busy this past week, using the momentum from the incident to secure multiple search warrants. The message read, "Thought you'd want to know. 15 more arrests today. Tank and his friends are cooperating with prosecutors. Your actions that day started a domino effect." He smiled, remembering his army commander's words about how one person standing up could inspire others to do the same. Since the incident, 3 more witnesses had come forward, no longer afraid to testify against the motorcycle club. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sergeant Martinez from the police department, carrying a folder and wearing a friendly smile. "Evening, Staff Sergeant. Hope I'm not interrupting." Cooper welcomed him in, noting the official-looking documents in the folder. They sat at his small dining table, where Cooper had been cleaning his service medals earlier, preparation for tomorrow's court appearance. "The department's been impressed with how you handled everything," Martinez said, opening the folder. "Not just the fight. Anyone can throw punches. But the way you tried to de-escalate, the minimal force used, the professional conduct afterward. That's what we're looking for." He slid an application across the table. The Philadelphia Police Department logo was clearly visible at the top. "We're starting a new unit," Martinez explained, "focusing on community outreach and veteran integration. We need officers who understand both military discipline and civilian perspectives. Someone who can bridge that gap." Cooper picked up the application, thinking about his options. His military contract would end in 2 months, and he'd been considering his next steps. The DA's office had made their own offer, and several private security firms had reached out after seeing the news coverage. "There's more," Martinez continued. "Remember Officer Chen? Turns out her brother runs a motorcycle repair shop. He's offered to fix up your Harley for free, his way of thanking you for standing up to the devil's hand. They'd been pressuring him to repair stolen bikes, but he couldn't prove anything until now." Cooper walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. His recovered Harley was parked below, still bearing the scratches from its time in the chop shop. Each mark now seemed like a badge of honor, a reminder that sometimes life's detours led to unexpected opportunities to make a difference. "You know," Cooper said, turning back to Martinez, "when I walked into the station that day, I was just hoping to file a report about my stolen bike. Funny how things work out." Martinez nodded understanding. "That's usually how it goes. The biggest changes come from small moments when we choose to do the right thing, even when it's not convenient." Cooper looked at the application again, remembering the feeling of protecting others, not with violence, but with controlled strength and unwavering principle. It was the same feeling he'd had in the army, standing between danger and those who couldn't defend themselves. "The police academy starts a new class next month," Martinez mentioned casually. "Perfect timing for when your military contract ends. And hey, you've already proven you can handle yourself in our parking lot." They both chuckled at that. Cooper reached for a pen, his decision made. Sometimes the best way to continue serving was to find new ways to protect and serve. As he began filling out the application, he realized that his stolen motorcycle had led him exactly where he needed to be. The evening news continued in the background, but Cooper wasn't listening anymore. He was focused on the future, ready to start a new chapter. His time in the army had taught him to fight when necessary, but more importantly, it had taught him to protect and serve with honor. Now he would continue that mission on the streets of Philadelphia, proving that sometimes the wrong soldier to mess with could be exactly the right person to make a difference.